Good day, viewers, and welcome to our special coverage of the Africa Chiefs of Defence Conference 2025, a pivotal gathering of military leaders from across the African continent hosted in Nairobi, Kenya. Today we bring you exclusive insights from General Michael Langley, Commander of the United States Africa Command, otherwise known as AFRICOM. He discusses regional security strategies, African-led solutions, and the fight against terrorism. Stay tuned as we delve into how these discussions are shaping a path towards stability and prosperity for African nations and their global partners.
Good afternoon to everyone from Africa Regional Media Hub. I welcome our participants logging in from across the continent and thank all of you for joining us. Today we are very pleased to be joined by the Commander of U.S. Africa Command, U.S. Marine Corps General Michael Langley. General Langley will discuss the Africa Chiefs of Defense Conference 2025. The African Chiefs of Defense Conference is a premier forum for military leaders from across the African continent to address pressing security challenges. We will begin today's briefing with opening remarks from General Langley. Then we will turn to your questions. We'll try to get to as many of those questions as we can during the briefing. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to General Langley for his opening remarks.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for taking time to talk to me today. I'm calling from Nairobi, Kenya, where we were wrapping up a significant event, the African Chiefs of Defense Conference. This year, we were joined by senior military leaders from over 37 African nations. And let me explain the dialogue. The dialogue here was powerful. It was focused on African-led solutions, regional cooperation, and long-term security strategies. These conversations reaffirmed something critical. African militaries are not waiting to be safe. African militaries are taking on security challenges head on and leverage opportunities for their nation to achieve stability and prosperity. So right now, as I speak to you, they continue to step up and take control of their own futures. Today, I want to emphasize U.S. AFRICOM's strategic approach. I've been charged by the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, to mitigate threats to the U.S. homeland posed by terrorist organizations, the most dangerous of which are unfortunately right here on the African continent. Now, to do this, first of all, AFRICOM is increasingly focused on helping our African partners address the root causes of terrorism. That means tackling instability at the local level through intelligence sharing, capacity building, and institutional strengthening, using and recommending tools beyond just the military might. So security is rooted in the strength of communities. Militaries must therefore be deeply integrated into society writ large to ensure safety and prosperity. Now, over the years of during my tenure of command, since 2022, my travels to Kenya, I was able to get out in the community. I visited Kibera and met with the grassroots organization, which is the starting for Hope for Communities, the SHOFO, led by Dr. O'Day. And Mr. Kennedy, he showed me the way in all the activities in which he was doing. Work over 40 counties across Kenya, mobilizing community-led efforts that prevent violence and build lasting peace. Now, that's the model of how real security starts at the ground level with the people. Now, AFRICOM's aim is to support African nations in building the self-reliance needed to confront terrorism and insurgency by assisting in building strong, capable military and security forces. Our partnership is summed up in 3 words: peace through strength. Strong partnerships are the best representation of that thought, because we're always stronger when we stand together. Second, while here at the HOD conference, we are having honest conversations about burden sharing. As resources are rebalanced globally, it is essential that all partners around the globe, Africa included, take more ownership in their regional and continental security. So that's why our military engagements emphasize the readiness of independent operations. We had exercises this spring leading into the summer, like African Lion in North Africa, Flintlock in the Sahel, and the Express Maritime series, Obagami Express, in the West. Now, Cutlass was done in the East, and then Phoenix Express was done in the Mediterranean. So across the periphery of Africa, we see that all these exercises together are no longer about dependence. It's about progressing to independent operations, building interoperability among nations. So interoperability that will enable crisis response and command-level leadership among African militaries. Let's just justify the Accord. This was the largest military exercise in East Africa. It trains over 1,300 troops from up to 20 nations across the continent of Africa. We do this each and every year. Kenya, along with Djibouti and Tanzania, they led from this front in the 2025 exercise by co-hosting the exercise. This is the kind of regional leadership exactly in the direction where we want to go, and we're encouraging it across the continent. Let me speak plainly about the threats, though. We in the world, and specifically Africans, are facing increasingly as years go by. The Sahel, that's where we consider it the epicenter of terrorism. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are confronted with this each and every day. They're in crisis. The terrorist networks affiliated with ISIS and Al-Qaeda are thriving, particularly in Burkina Faso, where the government has lost control of wide swaths of territory across their sovereign nation. Attacks are resurging in the Lake Chad region as well, and extremist groups are growing more aggressive. One of the terrorists' new objectives is gaining access to West Africa coast. If they secure access to the coastline, they can finance their operations through smuggling, human trafficking, and arms trading. This puts not just African nations at risk, but also increases the chance of threats to reaching the U.S. shores. That's why our coastal partners, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, and Benin, are fighting fiercely along their northern borders to prevent terrorist expansion, and U.S. AFRICOM is standing with them. In East Africa, in support of Somalia, the federal government, the U.S. is actively pursuing and eliminating jihadists. And at the request of the Somali government, this year alone, AFRICOM has conducted over 25 airstrikes, double the number of strikes that we did last year. But I must emphasize, we do prioritize protecting civilians. That is our moral imperative. AFRICOM has the highest standards in the region when it comes to protecting civilians that may find themselves surrounded by conflict. We do everything possible to keep them safe. Now, we're also focused on a broader strategic competition. My second charge from the Secretary Hexet is to confront military ambitions of the Chinese Communist Party on the continent. So while the U.S. works to build transparency and respectful partnerships, China continues to pursue access to Africa's resources, often ignoring long-term sustainability. So we're taking a different approach, one that links security with trade. We know private investment cannot thrive without safety. That's why AFRICOM's role is so vital. We're not just helping build military capacity for African nations. We are helping build a stability that underpins both African and American prosperity. Now, during my travels, I just want to note, the last 3 years, I've seen these investments firsthand. And it is clear to me that the whole of society approach is necessary to address these challenges. And I meet across the society and the community, especially across the youth, who are our future of the African continent, being able to stabilize and reach all the opportunities for prosperity. In Algeria, I met with a youth robotics team applying technology to solve local problems. That is proof that African innovation will be a force of stability in the future. I did the same thing in Morocco. Spoke to over 200 young cadets at the military academy. These are tomorrow's military leaders of the future, grounded in their service and discipline. Also, down last year at the CHODS conference in Botswana, I did go to a PEPFAR. This was supported medical station that saw firsthand the life-saving impacts and collaboration that saved over 20 million lives across Southern Africa. And then lastly, in Gabon, young students enrolled in STEM and robotics programs showed how they plan to use their projects in the future. And then also, while visiting young African leaders in Mauritania to Nigeria and to Somalia, I've seen young people that are getting the opportunities for prosperity in the future. So that was the rewards of my adventures to be able to visit various African countries, not just in the military sense, but across civil society. Now, I will say, AFRICOM's goal is to deepen partnerships. It's about the mutual goal of keeping our homeland safe, and it's about long-term capacity, not dependence. It's about empowering African nations to solve African problems, not just through handouts, but through trusted cooperation. A safe and stable and prosperous Africa is not a charitable goal. It's a strategic necessity for the United States and for our African partners. AFRICOM is leaning in with a targeted training and advanced intelligence sharing and to support institutions that endure long after exercises end or commanders rotate. So let me close with this. This will likely be my last final Chiefs of Defense conference as the AFRICOM commander. A nomination for my successor is expected soon. But no matter who holds this position, the AFRICOM mission remains constant. AFRICOM will continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with African partners and into the future. It's been an honor to stand with all of you. And I'm excited to see Africa's emerging leaders drive progress, not just across the continent, but across the world. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General Langley. We'll now begin the question and answer portion of today's briefing. If at any time you would like to ask a question, please indicate that by clicking on the raise hand button and then typing your name, your media outlet, your location, and your question into the chat tab. So that is a difference between the WebEx platform and the Zoom platform you may be used to. Today we're using the chat box to take questions. Please make sure to give us all this information, your name, your media outlet, your location, and your question, because from our side, all we can see is the logon that you're using for the platform, and that really doesn't tell us all the information we need. At any rate, we'd like to go to questions now, and we're going to be posing questions on the topic of today's briefing, which is the African Chiefs of Defense Conference 2025. So for our first question, I'll go to Chris Gordon of Air and Space Forces magazine, and his question is, what are the consequences of the U.S. leaving Niger? What alternative basing arrangements have been agreed to or are being pursued?
Oh, okay. Hey, thanks for that question, Chris. I'll just say that, since we left this year in September last year, we're observing a rise in attacks by violent extremist organizations, not only in this year, but across the Sahel, to include Nigeria as well, and emanating and going into Burkina Faso and Mali. Now, this increases is measurable by both frequency and complexity of these attacks, driven by persistent and social economic grievances, and the proliferation of weapons and increased capable terrorist groups across the board. So, unfortunately, with our withdrawal from the region, we have lost our ability to monitor these terrorist groups closely, but continue to liaise with partners to provide what support we can.
Thank you, General. Our second question goes to Fadi Mansour, Al Jazeera Media Network. And the question is, how hopeful is General Langley that AFRICOM's efforts in Libya will lead to military reunification? And are there any considerations to redeploy U.S. forces to the country?
Okay, thanks for that question, Fadi. I'll just say we've been meeting with and talking to both sides in Libya, trying to find ways to get the country on the path for reunification, and we're doing it. We're doing it through the security construct first, and hopefully we can set the stage and set the conditions for diplomatic process to continue. But at this Chad conference here in Kenya, we invited both sides to send their senior military leaders. Last year in both Botswana, even the previous year, both sides were in attendance. So we always welcome both sides at the Chad conference, where we had a meaningful exchange of ideas. But there's no discussion on troop movements. I'll just say that.
All right, thank you very much. Let's turn now to Jessica Donati of Reuters in Senegal. And the question is, can you offer your analysis on the latest series of major attacks in Nigeria and the Sahel? Do you see signs that groups are cooperating more broadly?
Well, Jessica, the recent attacks in Nigeria and across the Sahel are deeply concerning. The scale and brutality of some of these incidents are really troubling. So we're monitoring this closely, and these events and offering of sharing intel with the Nigerian and also regional partners in that area it remains constant. We are committed to supporting one of the most capable militaries in the region in Nigeria. Unfortunately, with our withdrawal out of the region, though, we have lost some of our ability to monitor terrorist attacks closely, but we continue to liaison with our partners to provide what support we can.
Thank you very much. Now let's go to Mr. Ngala Chimtom of In-Depth News of Cameroon. General Langley, in early April, before the U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee, you questioned Burkina Faso's governance, asserting that its mining resources were being used to sustain the current regime. However, recent developments suggest a different picture. Reports indicate that Burkina Faso now earns $1,200 per ounce of gold, significantly up from $300 under French oversight. Traditionally, President Traoré has allocated over $179 million in gold proceeds to provide farming equipment aiming to accelerate agricultural production. Given these facts, does this shift in resource allocation alter your previous assessment that raw material revenues primarily serve to keep Traoré in power?
Well, Nagala, let me start with this. Every nation makes independent decisions regarding their security, and including partnerships. We all respect their sovereignty. Given these reports, I'm glad to hear that there's a shift in resource allocation that benefits civil society, because the enduring solution to counterterrorism does start with protecting civil society writ large. So from a military perspective, which were my comments were directed towards, concerns remain on military resourcing management of what external military support is received for the whole fight of terrorism across their sovereign nation. So the U.S. seeks opportunities to collaborate with Burkina Faso on counterterrorism challenges. I invited Burkina Faso's Chief of Defense to the African Chiefs Defense Conference because I believe in maintaining that dialogue. It's still open. It's still open conversation to be able to address the challenges of being able, and solutions to be achieved through our collaboration for addressing the terrorist problem, which is the epicenter within their great country. And the great people of Burkina Faso deserve us to have that dialogue. Thanks.
All right, thank you. So Mr. Dean Wingren of Defense Web in South Africa asks, does General Langley foresee U.S. Africa Command participating in joint exercises with Africa, and in particular Southern African countries, increasing or decreasing or staying the same?
We're always exploring opportunities to expand exercises like Cutlass Express, Obigami Express, to include more Southern African nations. So, a lot of these express exercises, we focus on counterpiracy, counterterrorism, maritime domain awareness, and crisis response. So we have a number of partners in Southern Africa, including Botswana, as an emerging regional security exporter that we can enable to support mutual security goals with training and exercises. So we also have Africa Maritime Forces Summit in the Mauritius occurring in a few weeks. I'd like to be able to attend that as well. But, this is a prime purpose for conferences such as HOD. It's how we build a path forward together.
All right. Thank you very much. Question from Metro Star Media in Nigeria. Why is U.S. AFRICOM not helping Nigeria to combat Boko Haram and ISWAP, as well as pirates in the Gulf of Guinea? And for those of you who don't know, the ISWAP is the Islamic State West Africa province. General?
Okay, yeah, thanks for that question. So, as I said before, we respect nation sovereignty and only go where we're asked as long as it aligns with U.S. national security objectives. I was just in Nigeria back in November, where I got to see firsthand how we actively work with and support Nigerian defense objectives. During my entire command, I've been on a campaign of learning. And when I was in Nigeria, I sat across from our Nigerian partners to hear how we can assist. Because, again, the United States, we actively, with our partners, and in this particular case, Nigeria, we work together to combat Boko Haram and ISIS West Africa to promote regional security. Nigeria is a strategic African partner, and we have a long history of providing critical material and training support to Nigeria. It extends across from military sales, excess defense articles, and also training to go along with the foreign military sales. That's a great example of how the law of armed conflict education goes with military training. And also, we've also had some intel sharing with them. So Nigeria is a leading supporter and previous host of Obagami Express as well, highlighting their role as a leader in the region.
All right, thank you. From Mr. Eliud Kibi of The Star in Kenya, the African Union and Somalia are decrying the inadequate funding for Al-SOM, AUSSOM. The U.S. is non-committal to, I think this is a question, is the U.S. non-committal to any further funding? Won't this create a gap that the resilient Al-Shabaab will exploit amidst the drawback?
Okay, that's... That question there is really a policy question and a diplomacy type question, and I know that the AU and the UN are working to solve these problems. But from a security perspective and more operational perspective that I bring, we do wish for the sustainability of long-term stability in Somalia, and because Somalia does rely on building Somali security capacity. That's where I come in. We try to affect a shared responsibility for a broad coalition so the Somali National Army can achieve those security objectives. The current funding challenges at AWSOM kind of underscore the difficulties, but I would just stay out of that realm, but just talk about how, if they do solve these problems, it will be an enabler for continued operations in the Somali National Army's fight against Al-Shabaab. So I know that the U.S. continues to work with Somali stakeholders, partners, and neighbors to improve the collaboration to go against this formidable foe.
All right, thank you very much. I'd like to just remind everybody that we have the General for a half hour, and that's rapidly coming to a close, so I think we have time maybe for just a couple more questions. From Eric Schmidt of the New York Times, Eric asks, please assess the strength of ISIS-Somalia and Al-Shabaab in the wake of increase in U.S. airstrikes under the Trump administration.
Hey, thanks, Eric. Good to hear from you again. So, Eric, this is where we're going on that. As you well know, partner-led efforts supported by the U.S. airstrikes, it is working to degrade ISIS-Somalia and in their territorial control and across their leadership, because we are effectively hindering their ability to sustain a global network. That's the primary purpose of these operations. Our airstrikes support offensive Somali military ground operations as well against ISIS-Somalia. And then also our airstrikes have also supported Somali and awesome efforts to counter Al-Shabaab, which is entrenched, wealthy, and large Al-Qaeda group, as you well know. And they are, but we know that these groups have been adapting and increasing their reliance on ambushes and IEDs. So these increased strikes have achieved tactical gains against both groups. But lasting success will require a comprehensive strategy and addressing the root causes of instability and security sector, which requires institution building across the Somali National Army and their whole of government.
Thank you. Mr. Getahun Sita Tau of the Burkina Agency in Ethiopia asks, I think the question is, did Ethiopia participate in the conference? What is Ethiopia's role in the Horn of Africa? And is the U.S. shifting or has already shifted working with Ethiopia in fighting Al-Shabaab and stabilizing the Horn? What are the prospects and trends, General?
Yes. Hey, thank you for that question. You know, it was great to have Ethiopia represented at the African Chief of Defense Conference. I was able to meet with one of their senior military officials just a few hours ago. And that was very enlightening, and we shared ideas and opportunities to work together. So this was the prime purpose of the HOD conference, is how to build a path forward, standing together to address our shared security issues and also equitable distribution of burden across with our partners. Ethiopia brings a highly capable forces to combat Al-Shabaab alongside their Somali partners. So it was great to have Ethiopia here at the conference.
All right. Thank you, General. And I know your time is limited, so we do have to call it a wrap at half an hour. Do you have any final thoughts, General, to share with the group?
I just want to thank the media writ large as being able to tell the story. What achievements we made this week at the Africa Chiefs of Defense Conference, because it was an opportunity for us to come together and talk about African interagency experiences, civil relations, and then all our regional efforts. That in lies what our way forward of the African militaries with the United States being able to achieve shared objectives, especially with the most present challenge right now of countering terrorism and our collective operations, and then talking about the future force going into the future to affect security, stability, and prosperity for all African nations. Thank you all, and I appreciate the time you spent with me today.
And thank you, General Langley, for joining us and being so generous with your time today. Final thank you to the Commander of U.S. Africa Command, U.S. Marine Corps General Michael Langley.
That wraps up our coverage of the Africa Chiefs of Defense Conference 2025. We've heard from General Michael Langley on the critical role of regional cooperation and AFRICOM's commitment to supporting African nations in building strong, self-reliant security forces. From countering terrorism to fostering community-driven peace, these efforts highlight a shared vision for a stable and prosperous Africa. Thank you for joining us, and stay connected for more updates on global security and cooperation.